The following content has been provided by RWTH Aachen University.
And now let's have a look more at the cognitive processor. And for that, we need the assignment, the experiment sheet again, and go to experiment 2. And also again, work in pairs of 2. And one of you will be the experimenter and one will be the subject for this one. It's called the digit experiment. And the experimenter should choose 5 digits secretly from the number sequence there and read them to the subject. And the subject should not repeat that in any way or try to memorize that. And then the subject should count backwards from 50, answer a couple of questions. So what did you have for dinner 2 days ago, 3 days ago? What will you do later today? And then see if he or she still remembers the 5-digit sequence. So do this now. Okay, so now for this experiment, also once more just for the experimenters, how many of your subject remembered all 9 digits correctly? Oh, still a few, but significantly less than before. And did any one of you realize or recognize something by the way the numbers were read back then to you? Was there anything that you recognized?
I think most of us would remember them with some syntax, so like the first 4 digits and then the next 5 digits.
Okay. Yes, chunks is also the word that I would have used later on. It's very often that people tend to remember numbers, for example, in chunks. So instead of remembering 3, 6, 5, you have 3, 6, 5 as one block that you remember. And when you repeat this number later on, you tend to use these blocks to recite them. So in this experiment, we stored some information in your memory and then try to flood it with new information and then get this memory back out. And as we've seen, well, with 5, a lot of you remembered all of these numbers after some distractions that we gave you. But with 9, it was already a little bit harder. So at this, for this, you knew that you had to remember these 5 numbers. Now we're doing a little bit different. So switching the roles again of experimenter and subject, the experimenter reads this set of numbers and then at a random location says, well, stop. And we'll see how much the subject, how many numbers, digits, the subject still remembers of what was just read. So do this. After you've done this, now also once more for the experimenters, I will ask you how many digits your subject still remembered, and we'll do it this way. You put your hand up, and I'm going, did you remember 1 digit, 2 digit, 3 digits, 4? And as soon as this is not true anymore, you put your hand down. So we get see well how many were experienced. So all the experimenters, put your hands up. How many of your subjects remembered 1 digit, 2 digits, 3 digits, 4 digits, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11. Well, I think Professor Borchert had a contract for you. So, well, as you've seen, there was, I think at 5, there was the most hands going down. So this is apparently sort of the number that people can store immediately in their mind and then recall later on. And so they don't take it too seriously if you were under 5 or something, because it heavily depends on the person doing that and the task. So a lot of people might have a better system of remembering colors, cocktail recipes or whatever. And it also depends, well, when you are drunk, you remember less or something. Some external influences, let's call it that. So in this working memory, where you store the information you're just getting, Miller in 56 actually found out that it's 7 plus or minus 2 chunks that you can store in your working memory. And this is, yeah, in the 50s, so it's long ago, but for these types of tasks, you don't need a computer. So this also explains, yeah, or illustrates your brain doesn't change that much over time. And they also track the half-life. So anyone who knows what a half-life is, what this means? Yes.
It's when a nuclear reaction, when a half of nuclear, I don't know how to describe it, but it's the period of a nuclear element to
fall
apart.
So yes, what it means is, well, if you have an element, and in chemistry it describes, well, what is the time until roughly 50% of that has fallen apart and doesn't exist anymore. Well, in memory, if you remember the number 6, you can't remember half the number 6. So it basically describes the time until there's a 50% chance that you've forgotten that. And you see, well, if it's just one chunk, so one 3-digit sequence or whatever, chunk is not a defined element because it differs from person to person. But one chunk has roughly a half-life of 73 seconds. But if you try to remember more, for example, 3 chunks, this goes rapidly down. So it's just 7 seconds that you can keep it in your working memory. And there are different capacities and half-life for visual or auditory stores. So if we would say for the capacity, what would you think has a higher capacity, the visual store or the auditory store? Someone else this time?
Visual store.
The visual store? Yes, correctly. You can also see this in the representation in the computer. So for an image, you need much more information to store than for auditory signals. And what about the half-life? What do you think has a longer half-life?
Auditory.
Yes. Because, well, if I would just remember something for 200 milliseconds when I'm hearing someone, well, I'll be forgetting what he said immediately. So communication would be quite hard if you didn't have a long half-life in your working memory for auditory signals. Actually, for the visual capacity, as we said, well, you have 13 characters, or 7, here it says 17 now, letters that you can store, but only for, say, 200 milliseconds. While for auditory, you have less capacity, so 5 letters, but can store it for 1.5 seconds even. Okay, so the cognitive processor, so the loop that you're having there, is the processor that tells you, well, if I perceive something, what did I want to do with that information? That is taking roughly 70 milliseconds. So it's sort of the CPU deciding what to do next. What we also have is this long-term memory, where your long-term memories are stored. So it's sort of your name or basic things that you've learned before and can access frequently. And well, this model, once again, it's just a model, says, well, you have infinite capacity and infinite half-life in your long-term memory. And wouldn't that be great? That you never forget something? Well, might also not so great. But in sort of that is enough to describe it, because, well, when do you forget your name or when do you forget something that you've practiced really hard and know how to do in your sleep? This actually never goes away. And the sort how this is stored or how this is modeled is a semantic encoding, so by associations. So for example, if I have the concept apple, what do you connect to that? When you think of apple, what comes to your mind? There's, well, it's a fruit. If you can't read that, that is fine. It is either red or green, depending on what you want. It has size of a tennis ball.
It's also a computer firma.
Well, this is primed probably, yes. Computer firma. And all of these are also just concepts. So with the fruit, you also have different associations linked to that. And so your whole long-term memory is modeled here as a network of things. And this might also, or this is what happens when you try to remember something and you try to build a connection there. In Germany, there's often this concept of Eselsbrücke, where you try to connect something to something stupid to remember it more easily. And this is basically just pressing association in your network, that you can recall this information more easily. And the way this works as well, you can access this quite fast.
This content was provided by RWTH Aachen University.